Alright guys, welcome back to Matt's HackRods. It's going to be a little bit different video. I'm going to sit here this entire time and just talk. It's going to hopefully be a little more interesting than that. I'm going to be kind of sharing with you guys a quick history of my car here, my 1962 Chevy Wagon. Just kind of from when I got it to where we are now, and maybe a little bit of the history that I know of the car, which isn't much, but that I know of at least. So back like 2016, 17, and 18, I kind of started to get a little bit more of a thing for station wagons. Even though I grew up around my dad's 64 Nova Super Sport, which is a two-door hardtop, I don't know why, I just always kind of got drawn to the Nova station wagons. It's something about them, something about their body lines. I've always loved the body lines of a Nova, but the elongated body lines of the station wagon just, to me, look a lot better. And at that time, I hadn't even thought about ever owning a classic car or even a car of my own for a while from that point. But I don't remember exactly when the conversation came about, but it happened relatively quickly. I think it might have been in January of 2019 that the conversation came up about a station wagon, a 1962 Chevy Nova station wagon, being for sale in Oregon. And at the time, we were friends with a guy named Greg, very close family friend of ours, and David, another very close family friend of ours. I don't remember if it was, I think it might have been Greg I think it was David who found the car, and Greg is the one who ended up buying the car for me, but that's later on in the story. Anyways, we somehow get told about this car and the fact that it's for sale. And it all relatively happened pretty quickly, because I remember my dad showing me pictures of it, and I was thinking like, oh, okay, that's cool and all, but we already have a classic car, we don't need another, or not even like that, but more of a, why don't we just focus on my dad's car? I'm probably not going to own one. And throughout the course of the next couple of weeks, it like spiraled really quickly. And then next thing I know, my dad's like, yeah, we're planning on going to get a new car, And I remember thinking, what? Like absolute surprise. Mainly also because it took convincing my mom to allow us to get another car and allowing her son's first car to be a not entirely safe station wagon. No mother really wants that to be her son's first car. But I digress. She ended up going for it, which honestly was a big shock. The pictures I had seen of the car, it had been buried in snow, because middle of nowhere, Oregon. And the guy was selling it for, I think, like $1,200. And I was thinking at the time, there's no way I have that kind of money. But again, bringing up our family friend Greg, he did have that kind of money. And so what he decided was he was going to buy the car for me outright, and I would then work with him in his lawn care business to pay off the car. And unlike a lot of other people where they would be like, all right, you're paying off the car, but I still own it, he gave it to me immediately, and he just let me pay it off even though it was already in my ownership. He proceeded to come with us on the trip over to Oregon to help load up the car, which was a nightmare to say the least, because it had been snowing super, super heavily in Oregon. And if I'm not mistaken, when we got there, we were either at the tail end of a blizzard or right at the beginning of one. I think we were right at the beginning of a blizzard coming on. And, everything was frozen. Ice, snow, everything. It was freezing cold. Because when we got it, the day that we showed up, I still remember this day very vividly, was February 11th, 2019. Still one of the best days of my life, to be completely honest with you. And I remember thinking, we pulled down the street, and the car is just sitting there. I could barely see just like the front corner of it, and it's buried in snow, and I was like, I already love this car. I already love it. It's already my car. No say about it. I'm done. I want it, But we proceeded to load it up. No big deal. Funny story, actually, when we were heading back from Oregon with the car on the trailer, we actually were just barely outrunning a massive snowstorm that was coming, because apparently, as we were driving through the freeways of Oregon, headed back towards where we are now, they told us, or at least what we heard, was that the freeway was actually progressively being shut down behind us as we went because the snow was that bad. So that's just a funny story that I still remember from that day. And one of the other things is when we stopped at a gas station on the way back from where we got the car, just on the drive back, somebody came up to us. We had the car in the trailer. It did not look good at all. It faded paint, mismatched wheels, covered in snow. The interior was trashed. It was falling apart, right? Somebody comes up to us, parked at the gas station, and says, "How much do you want for the car?" And it was at that point that I realized just how special this car actually was, because it was in pretty much the worst shape it had ever been in its life. And we'd barely even gotten like a little ways away from where we picked up the car, and somebody was already asking to buy the car. So I think, 16 at the time when I got it. Yeah, every 16-year-old kid wants a muscle car. Yeah, I know. But we get the car, and we get it home, and I immediately just jump into it. Like, jump into figuring out what the car is, what's the history behind the car, what does it take to work on the car. This became my personal project because it gave me the resources necessary to learn everything I know about classic cars and cars in general now came from this car. Because if I wanted to be able to have a car that I could drive to school and go pick up friends and hang out with, I had to make it. I didn't just get given a car that ran and drove perfectly fine. To be completely honest, when I got the car, it was in really rough shape. It had a completely blown up 283 that somebody had swapped into it. We're guessing in like the early 70s or late 60s. They'd done a really botched job at swapping it in, and as we later came to find out when we pulled the motor and tore the motor apart to see if it was even salvageable, they had spun a rod bearing in the motor and welded the bearings together. So that motor was trashed. I remember sitting in the car the night that we got it home, and I went to go step up out of the car, like, because I was sitting on the seat, and I went to go step up out of the car, and I just barely put some weight on the floorboard, and my foot went straight through the floor, right to the grass below. And I remember my heart just dropping, because I just realized my car has horrific rust problems in the floorboards. And my dad, of course, trying to console me, he's like, "Hey, it's no big deal. We have a welder, we have metal, we can fix it. It's not that bad." Which at the time, I was freaking out, but I look back at it now, it really wasn't that hard of a fix. It took a little while, yes, but doing it right is better than doing it, the hacked up way. And I was like, all right, maybe I should go check the rest of the floorboards. Because like I said, we loaded it up and left. Like, we didn't take much of a look at it. I was like, this is my car. I don't care how it is. I want the car. Anyways, I go over to the passenger side of the car, and I remember taking like a screwdriver, I think it was, and I just like poked the floor, and it straight through. Like, absolutely, floor just disintegrated. And that's what started the progress, really, of stripping the car down to nothing, interior-wise, and making it my car. So what came about after that was actually a pretty fun day that I remember pretty well. A really close friend of mine named Cyrus. I invited him over, and I was like, listen, this is going to be sucky, it's going to be miserable, but I need help cleaning out the car. The car had been sitting since, I think, 75 was the last date tagged, and it had been left with some of the windows down, so the interior was rotten, moldy, wet, just nasty. Pine needles everywhere. Mice have been having a freaking apartment complex in this thing, and they just chewed up everything. And amongst all of the mice poop, pee, nesting, rotten carpet and upholstery, there was like a couple hundred, maybe even 1,000 dead wasps all over the dash. And it was disgusting. Yet, here I was. This is my car. I love it. I'm going to clean it out. So my buddy, I asked him to come over, and I was like, this is going to suck, but I really need help. And honestly, I was pretty surprised that day because he said, all right, let's do it. And we spent the entire day stripping the entire interior out of the car. I mean, pulling headliner down that was full of mouse nests, taking up seats that were crunchy and falling apart with rust and rot. I mean, stripping out moldy carpet, fabric, everything, vacuuming up all the mouse poop, and it was a mess. Yet, he said, all right, let's do it. And we got it done in a day. Got the car completely stripped out, cleaned out, perfectly fine. And it was at that point I really did start to realize just how bad the rust holes were, because now we had front seat out, rear seat out, all the upholstery out. We had, I think we took the door panels off, but I don't remember. I can't remember if we had left the door panels on or we took them off later. But we basically stripped the interior to where there was nothing in there. Now, I come to find out, side topic, when I had gotten the car, it only had one original steel wheel on it, and 3 other were these just terrible, cheap, weird, like kidney mag kind of looking wheels that were just, they were terrible. But thankfully, when I go to clear out the back of the car, I found all 3 of the other original steel wheels, which are actually the wheels that I ran for the car the longest by painting them black and just putting new tires on them. But I digress. So we clean out the car, and now we have completely bare metal floor that you can really just see how the floor looks. And there was Flintstone level holes in the floor. I'm talking like you could literally Fred Flintstone this car down the street. It was just massive. And I remember thinking, oh, that's it, we're done. I remember thinking immediately, like, I can't do this. Car's done, too much work, might as well sell it. Because at that point, I hadn't had it that long, and in my head, I was still thinking, I'd rather just work on my dad's car. Because at this point, the car really hadn't become mine yet. You know? It hadn't really sunk in. It wasn't until I started really digging into the car and fixing things and doing things with the car that it really started to kind of hit me. You know? I remember when we found out the motor was locked up, I was pretty bummed out about that because, I mean, yes, it's pretty illogical. The car's been sitting since the mid-'70s. I didn't know what I was thinking, but I was really hoping we could save the motor or something, you know? It had like I said, a 283 V8 that had been swapped into it, but it still had its original 3-speed on the column. And I remember thinking, okay, we'll put a new motor in it, we'll keep the transmission. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the transmission didn't end up being good either, or at least we didn't want to use it, whatever the situation was. And so we yanked those out. So now I got even more discouraged on the project because I had a completely stripped out vehicle, no interior, mismatched wheels and tires, no tires that were actually good tires, no engine, and no trans. It kind of bums you out, you know? I literally had a shell of a car. But it was actually at that point that I started to really envision my car, my way, how I want the car to be. You know, I grew up around my dad's car, and so I had a lot of ideas of how I want Novas to look in general. And then I transferred that into my idea of the perfect Nova wagon. You know, the Nova being a 62 had some 62 only parts, and I didn't like some of those 62 only parts. So then I started envisioning adding parts from like a 63 Nova or 64 Nova or so on and so forth. Like kind of mixing and matching this Nova wagon to be my car. It was at that point that we started ordering parts. We bought 2 brand new floor pans for the front of the car, passenger and driver. We bought, we bought the floor pans, and then we started to just piece the car together. We got a motor from somebody that we knew. Sadly, the motor turned out to be junk. It lasted like a month or two, maybe a little bit more, and all of a sudden started showing chunks in the valve covers, or in the head.